Just how safe is our generic drug supply? And what standards does the government use to evaluate the safety of those drugs? This story is a shocker and one everyone deserves to hear, particularly those who rely on life-saving generic drugs. Recent reports suggest that there are major lapses. India supplies 40% of the generic and over-the-counter drugs to the United States. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 5 drugs manufactured in India are fakes. And we haven't even begun to speak about China. Here to give us a glimpse into what the government is doing or not doing to protect all of us is research fellow at the Manhattan Institute's Center for Medical Progress, FDA watcher, YEVGENY FEYMAN. YEVGENY, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So how concerned should we be about these stories, and we see many of them now, that there are lapses in these Indian plants where so many of the drugs that come to the United States and are exported around the world originate?
You know, it's very scary. We had a huge scandal with Ranbaxy Pharmaceuticals. It was a generic drug maker in India, and it turned out that a ton of their drugs, most of their drugs that they were shipping to African countries, to the U.S., were completely fake. They manufactured generic Lipitor, and it turned out that it was adulterated with glass shards. The FDA fined them $500 million. That's the largest fine ever placed on a generic manufacturer. The FDA is definitely stepping up their game, but we're not out of the woods yet.
Yeah, they're now inspecting 160 of the plants. They're claiming progress. I want to share with you and the viewers, this is Dinesh Thakur. He was the whistleblower, a former Ranbaxy executive. That's the company that was fined $500 million. He speaks here about the data needed to prove the effectiveness of these generic drugs made at their Indian plant. Listen.
The data is important because the FDA or other agencies globally look at that information to give you marketing authorization to sell that drug.
That it works, that it's safe.
That's right. We start getting into the files, and lo and behold, we find that none of that exists in the first place.
What did that mean?
It means that we've gotten approvals from the FDA to sell drugs that were based on no data or data that was fraudulent.
How common do you think this is?
You know, India's regulatory apparatus for pharmaceuticals is very, very small. It's very young. India's pharmaceutical industry is very young in general. They don't have the expertise that the FDA has. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a much bigger problem. And it's good that the FDA is finally recognizing that it's a problem. They've recently decided to devote $20 million through 2017 to start testing all sorts of drugs, including generic drugs, not just at the time of application, but randomly. They're going to request batches from companies at random times to make sure that the drugs are what they say they are.
But Yevgeny, the Indians are not pushing back. India is saying, wait a minute, the FDA polices the United States, not here. And they're just trying to control the flow of these cheaper generics into the market. How credible is that? And what about China?
You know, so obviously the FDA only polices the United States, and that's exactly why the FDA needs to be able to inspect facilities in India if they want to export into the United States. This is one of those few industries where poor quality can lead to people dying. It can lead to very measurable harm. So the argument that the FDA is trying to police India isn't a very credible response. Now, China, they've been a little reticent about inspections, but they've done so in a very clever way. What they've done is they haven't issued visas to new FDA inspectors that are supposed to come into the country. That's probably more of them holding out, trying to flex their muscles a little bit against the United States than an indication of the quality of drugs that would be manufactured in China.
But this is a major concern. I mean, vital components to so many of the steroids and the antibiotics that are exclusively made in China, we rely on. Without those components, we can't make these drugs or bring them into the marketplace. But to have no inspections in China, and from what I'm reading, they won't allow inspections of their plants.
Right. So we do have some inspections. A GAO report that was released in 2008 actually looked at inspections by country from 2002 to 2007. China was on there. We don't do as many inspections as we should, absolutely. And that really has to do with China's constant competition with the U.S. They are pretty much the world's second largest economy. They're the world's largest country. So they always feel a need to flex their muscles against the U.S. But in general, China has a more developed pharmaceutical industry than India does. They have a better class of biological engineers, of chemists that really are dedicated to their craft, whereas in India, because this industry is so young and they're trying to protect their cost advantage as early as possible, we're seeing much more quality issues than what we're seeing in China, even with a few inspections that we have done in China.
Yevgeny, we only have a minute. How concerning is all of this, given that the Affordable Care Act is routing so many patients in the United States toward generic drugs and away from the marquee brands?
You know, we've been using generics much more than brands for a while now. So about 84% of prescriptions that are prescribed in the U.S. are for generics. Now that's going to increase even more with Obamacare, with the Affordable Care Act, and it is something we should be concerned about. That's why I'm not really worried about the FDA stepping up its game here. This is the one time where I'd say that the FDA should pursue more heavy-handed regulation to make sure that a Ranbaxy case never happens again.
And do you see that happening? Or is this too slow, this progress? I mean, it seems they're late to the game of policing these plants or inspecting them with any, measurable imprint.
Sure, they're definitely a little bit late to the game, and part of it has to do with the authority. We will need an act of Congress to give the FDA more discretion in what they demand from companies, how they inspect facilities. Right now, it's very difficult for the FDA to ban imports from a company unless they meet particular requirements. They can only ban facilities. So Congress needs to step up their game also, and I am hopeful that in the coming years, Congress is going to do that.
Very good. YEVGENY Feyman, thank you so much for being with us, and we will continue to watch this story. It's very important.